Hi everybody, and welcome to week 2 of the Golf Zone Leadbetter Virtual Summit. We'd like to thank you for tuning in from wherever you are in the world. I'm Stuart Clayton, Head of Education for Golf Zone Leadbetter, and today we've certainly saved the best for last, and we're getting towards the end of our summit sessions. We've got a title for you, a session called Learning from Lead, Coaching on Golf's Main Stage, and I can't think of 3 better people to have on the panel here today. We've got Jonathan Yarwood, Sean Hogan, and Chris Como. Gents, thank you for taking time to join us today. I'm sure everybody that's tuned in is very grateful that you've kindly given up a little bit of your day. Before we get to introduce you properly, for all the viewers out there, you'll see in the menu bar that there is the option to ask questions. The guys have asked me to hopefully have you guys interactive as possible and ask some questions. Make sure that you post your questions in that chat box. I'll be able to field them and direct them throughout the conversation. The guys are going to have a fantastic conversation about their experiences, their learnings, their dealings with players, life on tour, etc., etc., etc. And this could go anywhere. I feel absolutely honored and privileged to be part of this. All 3 of these guys have worked with world #1s and major winners across the globe, so you're in for a treat. So we have Chris Como. Chris is from Southern California, has a master's degree in biomechanics, is the presenter of the Swing Expedition on the Golf Channel, and has worked with many world-class players, including Tiger Woods and currently Bryson DeChambeau. Jonathan Yarwood has over 25 years coaching experience at the highest of levels, has worked with Sean and with Chris for a period of time, has coached many US amateur winners, US girls winners, AJGA players of the years, winners on tours all over the world, and most notably the 2005 US Open champion Michael Campbell. Sean is based at our headquarters in Champions Gate. Sean is our worldwide director of instruction, has worked also with players of all levels across the world and had winners on all stages, and obviously worked extensively with David at Champions Gate and throughout his time there with a number of world-class players as well. All 3 coaches have been voted in Golf Digest Top 20 Teachers Under 40, Golf Digest Top 50 Teachers, and Golf Magazine's Top 100 Teachers in America. So if you're tuned in and you're listening today, you are absolutely privileged with the information that's going to come your way. I myself have been fortunate to be around David's academies for over 20 years now, and you guys probably as long, if not longer than that. I think we all appreciate that David's been a pioneer in the world of golf instruction and still stays that way, and we all have great respect for him. But I think I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how your experiences with David and your learnings from starting out in your coaching careers have been shaped, and what you've kind of got from that and how it's helped you in your coaching career today. And maybe Sean, you can start us off. You're currently still at Champions Gate working with David extensively and in your own right. It'd be great to hear a little bit about your journey and your time with Jonathan and Chris. I know you guys stay in contact a lot and you kind of share a lot of ideas, but I think the viewers would be intrigued to hear a little bit about how you guys got started and how you've developed.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction there, Stuart. That's very kind of you. And on behalf of David and certainly all our LGA associates around the world, I can't thank Jonathan and Chris enough for spending this hour with us. This is certainly very grateful on your behalf to give this time that you're giving. And certainly in my time with David, certainly my first lesson with him was back in '89, so that's kind of dating me. And I was an undergrad there at South Florida in Tampa, and came up for a lesson with a group of 4 of us from the university, and lo and behold, he and Nick Faldo came in on the back end of the lesson. So that was a real thrill for me, very inspiring. I was always very interested in sort of the, shall we say, the teachings of the game, the workings of the game, and consistency and solid contact and all that. And so the late '80s, early '90s for me were very influential in my teaching career. And then when you go there for lessons as a player, you know, you know, you get introduced to a player like Nick Faldo, or Nick Price was there, or David Frost, some of these players in David's sort of earlier in his career. And so it was very inspiring as a college player. And fortunately, you know, I had the opportunity to come on in, what was it, 1994, in late 1994, and begin my apprenticeship. And always remember there, Stuart and guys, the thing that impressed me most was when I finished my certification with David, he said to me, hey, one thing I want you to adhere to here is don't ever try to teach like I do. And so those words have lingered with me for many years. I said to David, I said, I've just spent a year going through your certification. Why do you not want me to teach like you do? And he said, because you have to go out and find your own identity as a teacher. You have to find out in your own way how you want to communicate with your students, get the message across. I have my style. You need to develop your style, just like a player. So that was very, I would say, for me as a coach, a young coach, trying to learn so much, gain so much information and impress upon my students, that I thought, hey, that's pretty, that gives me a lot of freedom. And I really felt that, shall I say, going forward, that really helped me expand my knowledge, reading about other teachers, other players, information and feedback that I was getting, watching these other players and teachers, and then applying that to how I would maybe customize a lesson and tailor it to the student in front of me. So whether it was communication skills, say mental tactics that you might want to apply when the player just needs a little confidence boost, or hey, maybe it might be technical and some feedback on some video or what have you. So I think for me personally, the journey beginning as a player, but then understanding that as a coach, I didn't have to adhere necessarily to the exact style David was teaching, but just open my mind up to everything that was out there. And obviously 30 something years later, and here we are. And as I say, privileged to be with both of you. Jonathan, I know we spent quite a bit of time here at Champions Gate, and watching you I mean, if anybody wants to know the blueprint on how to win USGA events, you're it. So any thoughts on your interactions with David over the years?
Well, you know, I kind of attest to a lot of what you said. And again, thanks very much for having me on. You know, it's a privilege to be here and to give back a little bit to David and the Leadbetter organization, who did so much for my career. I definitely wouldn't be where I am or have achieved anything like I've achieved without that influence. I think the biggest thing that I found with the Leadbetter Academy, especially early on, was you kind of understood there's like a kind of code to things. There's like a blueprint. There's a structure to it. It wasn't guesswork, and some of that kind of structure has stuck with me my whole career, really. And what really attracted me to it in a similar era to Sean really was the fact, I remember, this is how old I am, by the way, I had a Filofax. That's how old I am. And in this Filofax, when I was in New Zealand studying from this coach in New Zealand, I had a Filofax, and I was working with some really good players, Michael Campbell, lots of players when they're amateurs and stuff. And I was writing down on each page what I thought the setup should look like, what I thought the start should look like, what I thought halfway back should look like they call P's now, but we call L's. And my L's kind of really were very similar to what came out in the Leadbetter book. And I thought, geez, that's weird. I kind of figured that out, and that's similar. Oh, I like that. Well, this is good. And I was coaching an LPGA player at that time who won a tournament, a British girl called Helen Dobson, who became a very successful, one of the most successful amateurs ever, actually, in British golf. Nothing to do with me. She's just very good. But we went over to Florida to Lake Nona, and I met David there, and I was like Sean, I was a little bit in awe. Look, the bottom line is I'm a golf fan as well as being involved in golf. It's a great privilege to be involved in the game. I just love everything about it. And to be in that era where, you know, you see Nick Faldo practice, who's one of my all-time heroes, and then to see David Leadbetter next to him, I was like, I had to pinch myself. So, you know, it's had a massive influence on my career, there's no question. I think the structure that was created there, the analysis systems, the stuff that the templates that I still use to this day, the diagnosis templates, you know, mentally, I think more than anything, are still there, and I learned them very early on, and they've stood the test of time, as have a lot of the kind of things that David has talked about over the years have been really, you know, shown with technology to be true as well. So you know, it's very privileged. We kind of knew the code very early on, and we were way ahead of the game, in my opinion. And technology has just validated what we learned at quite an early age, as Sean was saying, in the 90s and early 2000s. I thought, you know, we really were way ahead of the game. What's your experience, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the sort of how we diagnose things and kind of the what we're teaching, I feel like is constantly evolving, obviously. You know, the lead influence, I mean, it's just the whole industry, right? He's influenced it in so many different ways. I started teaching in like 97, I guess, ish. And, you know, at that time, I mean, lead was, he was it, right? And the first books I bought, you mentioned the links, right? What was that? The Golf Swing, which was, I guess David Frost was the model in that, right? And then there's the Nick Faldo Golf Winning Formula. I went through like 3 copies of that book because the binding would always like wear out. It wasn't like the best written book, not the best like built book, right? And then, you know, he had those videos at Valderrama with Faldo back in the day.
I've got some of those swings.
Awesome stuff. How like just the way Faldo swung it back then. Price wrote his book, The Golf Swing, right? There's just, that was like all the best golf information was coming out of like lead or people that lead were teaching at that time, in my opinion. So early on, that was like what really kind of like helped me sort of like start to really look at the golf swing in a way where you can break it down into detail. I spent some time with Mac O'Grady after that, which was again going into detail, but it was these sort of the godfathers of instruction that would take deep dives into it. That in my mind was like, wow, this is such a deep subject potentially. And I grew up in Southern California, and you know, early on, I was like, I want to watch people teach, I want to learn from people. So I would drive from LA to Palm Springs at Desert Willow, which is where the Leadbetter Academy was at the time, and I would watch Adam Schreiber, who you guys are all friends with, which was a lot of people at the time. And he became a great friend and mentor, and his approach was obviously heavily influenced by Leadbetter, him and Mike Wilson also. And then I think that was at the time when lead was starting to kind of do some stuff with Chris Welch in biomechanics. At the time, I think it was human performance technology. And so it was kind of like my first introduction to a little bit of biomechanics also. And then eventually, because you know, my path was, I wanted to pick as many different brains as possible. Obviously lead was one of them. I went to Florida, did an internship and primarily kind of latched onto you, Jonathan, during that window at the junior academy. And it was, you know, again, it was an environment where I had never seen teaching that creative. You know, there's the what to teach, right? Which again, people have different approaches, whatever, but then there's the how you teach, which also is ever evolving. But to be in an environment where people were using like so many training aids and trapping things with, you know, noodles and just so creative, it was just, to me, it just really expanded my mind of what teaching could look like to really effectuate change in a person. And that really stuck with me. I mean, it really was almost like a paradigm shift on how you can communicate to someone outside of language, right? Communicate with spatial traps and things like that. And that was actually the first time I had seen a biomechanics graph. There was a closet. This was at Bradenton. There was a closet that had a bunch of videos of lead giving lessons, and I devoured those videos, which was amazing to watch him give a lesson. And then, you know, just sort of this this great sense of kind of, you know, what they would call cause and effect, but you change this and then all of a sudden 3 or 4 things change down the chain, right? And then I stumbled upon this folder that had graphs. It was Ernie Els, Nick Price, and Greg Norman. It was Chris Welch, and at the time it was Human Performance Technologies, which I think now is Xenolink. And he was doing biomechanics analysis, and I've always been kind of like a person who's liked, you know, science and math a little bit, and I was like, what is this? So, you know, there's so many just great memories of being at the Leadbetter Academy with you, and then just being around people who, you know, were influenced by lead and just kind of like my own studies. So that's kind of my background with lead.
Yeah, so fantastic information and a great trip down memory lane. And you know, I think all of you have touched upon there about finding your identity. And Sean, you said that David talked about finding your own identity as a coach. You've all kind of, you know, further on in your careers, and you all have fantastic success, and you're currently working with top flight players as well as others. How important, or how do you help the players that you work with find their identity? Because I think that's a huge part as well, isn't it? Helping a player find who they are. Jonathan, what would you say to that?
Well, I work on a fact and evidence basis. It's as simple as that. You know, I think that there's a real myth about David Leadbetter and the Leadbetter system, by the way, in the fact that there's only one way to swing. There's a lead way. That's absolute rubbish. I've seen Lead teach 400 different swings to 400 different people. And you know, I think, you know, what I do is I use modern technology to create what I call some facts. Okay, the facts are, you know, you're doing A, B, and C. You know, the force plates say you're doing this. The pressure plate says you're doing that. The video says you're doing this, and the TrackMan says you're doing that. Okay, that's the evidence. Okay, now they're the facts. So how do we fix that? Then you get artistic to change and kind of influence those numbers, and then you create evidence of your intervention. So I think what you try and do is make everyone a kind of efficient version of themselves based on fact, evidence, and sound physics. And I think that's what Chris has done amazingly well with Bryson, and continues to push the envelope incredibly, which we're all chasing to some extent, which we did a show the other day, Chris and I, on how juniors are trying to chase what he's doing. And again, hats off to him to push the envelope in such a great degree. But I think the big thing about modern coaching compared to when we started, yes, what we knew has stood the test of time, there's no question. I've adopted modern technology like a duck to water, because what David figured out without technology, which is a mark of his genius in my view, is the fact that, you know, what he talked about has actually been validated by technology. So, you know, I think that it's really interesting how it's evolved, but I think modern technology has taken the opinion out and put the facts in. And that's what I do with all the different players. I don't go in with an agenda. I go in with, okay, what's the cold hard facts of all the data? How do I influence the data? How do you move? How are you built? And how do I improve that data? And that's pretty much the approach, I think, of a lot of modern coaches. I'd be really interested to hear what Chris has got to say on the same subject.
Yeah, and I think this is somewhat to teaching in general. So I don't think you can circumvent trial and error, right? I think trial and error is a massive part of just kind of how you learn and figure things out. And as a coach, you can do like all the education summits, seminars, read whatever book, go watch people teach, but you got to teach. Like you got to get in there and give a lot of lessons, I think, to really kind of develop that skill set. I think when you educate yourself and you're using technology, you get a great sort of feedback mechanism, and it can kind of expedite that learning process, right? It's almost like if you have trial and error, you're kind of narrowing the space that trial and error may be happening. So you just learn faster. You know, you get more out of every hour you spend, in a sense. And I think it's very similar with a player. Like I'm never trying to create a roadmap or be come from a direction of like being rigid to where it's sort of too tight of a path that we're trying to like follow. But it's more of like narrowing this space and having this trial and error, but through that narrowing of the space and using kind of feedback mechanisms like technology, again, you know, you sort of speed up that learning process. So I think that's, in a lot of ways, at least for me as a coach, it's like, look, you're developing your own sort of swing that's going to work under pressure. Because, you know, for a competitive golfer, that's the end game that they're going after is kind of when, you know, they get a hot dog stuck in their throat type of thing, right? They're just gasping for air. How do you still hit decent shots? And there's a lot of things that go into that are outside the scope of what we can measure. So it's like, there's no way TrackMan is going to tell me like what's the perfect path for someone to hit a shot when they're just like shaking out of their pants, right? But I do think you can use these things as feedback mechanisms, again, to sort of speed up that process, but encourage them to be like, look, at the end of the day, this is the end game. It's going to be your own trial and error and follow that intuition. I'm going to try to keep you from going down any weird paths that might kind of, you know, whatever could end up bad, I guess. And direct you in directions I think are going to be good. But at the end of the day, respect the trial and error process. And that's part of how you actually end up owning and having kind of your own game that's yours and not your coach's, right? So
to Chris's point, to some extent, and then I'll hand over to Sean. You know, it's not just science. There's no question about it. I think it's a blend of art and science. You know, we're talking about, you know, what you do at the tour and elite level here today. Well, at the tour and elite level, there's an enormous amount of pressure on these players. I mean, you know, who does a job where 3 million people are going to comment on how you've done your job that day? You know, there's an enormous amount of pressure on these guys of performance, and the margins are so fine. You take someone like, you know, Jordan Spieth, you know, people have written him off. He'll be back, I guarantee it. He's just a casualty of the spotlight is what he is. But, you know, to Chris's point, it's a blend of art and science. It's not just solely science. I know Chris is known for the science and biomechanics, etc. But as I said, you know, Bryson is actually a very artistic player. And I'm sure, I know all the players that Sean works with, very similar. You know, he's created some amazing players over the years, and he's done it very quietly, and you know, hasn't kind of wanted to get in the spotlight, but behind the scenes he's been very influential. So I'd be really interested to hear what Sean's got to say about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I both of you have made some great points. You have the science and the data and the artistic element to it, where you're working with an individual. As Chris was mentioning, you got to figure out what their personality type is. You know, some players, as you can say, you can push a little harder. Some players, you've got to maybe coddle them a little bit more. I know Chris, obviously on Saturday after that round at Wingfoot this year, you kind of had to remind Bryson of, hey, you know what, that was a tough US Open day. You grounded out. You're right where you need to be, and just a little session under the spotlights there, literally in the darkness, just to get, hey, as you say, just to get his confidence back, get back on theme, get the ball, as you say, flighting the way he wants to, get his fields connecting to ball flight. Those are things that as teachers you have to use your instincts, and you have to learn to use them at the right time. So I think when I've watched David over the years, the thing that's helped me as a teacher is when to know to step in and really maybe encourage the student down a certain track, and sometimes, as you say, to shut up and back off. I mean, sometimes you've got to actually let that process play out, see how a certain field that you might interject, a bit of trial and error, and see how that transfers itself into their ball striking, short game, what have you. I think to that point, you know, one of the things that helped me, especially looking at his career with Faldo, I got to teach a few sessions with him on the back end of Faldo's career and up to the 96 Masters, was David said, hey, we worked for 13 years, but those first, say, 12 to 18 months, he pretty much settled on the theme. I mean, obviously, Faldo fought a very spinny ball flight, couldn't move it in certain directions at the time. And so when they came up with the formula in the swing, certain keys, the following 12 years was really a case of, as Chris, you pointed out, trial and error, maybe creating the same feel, but a different thought, a different feel to get to the same outline within the swing. So I think as teachers, you've got to have an open mindset here, and know the person in front of you. Say, Jonathan, look, there's so much information out there. We can even get kids, and you can see their shot stat data, whether they're whatever stats program they're working with. We can capture it all technically. I think from a technical aspect for me, and Chris, you may be able to talk about this, I found using some of the 3D systems has actually helped my teaching eye. So rather than having to refer to, you know, sort of a KVS system, having used it, I can actually see, okay, this is where we're going to go with this student biomechanically. So the technology platforms for me, whether it's pressure, force, 3D, they've actually helped my teaching eye and my instincts. Because sometimes, look, you know, you take a wonderful, powerful athlete like Maria Fassi. I mean, obviously got a huge engine, but when she walks into, say, our hitting bay and we capture some data, she's like, hey, what should we work on? So we've got to be very savvy about how much information we're going to give a player like Maria, whereas, hey, another player might like to go down a certain rabbit hole, maybe like Bryson, to understand that, but then you've got to come back out of that hole and convert it into a simple feel. Faldo is renowned, for instance, for having his two thoughts going back, you know, rotate, set, and then say cover, release. So it might be that little rhythm thing that you're turning the mechanics into. So I think as teachers, we've got to be creative, not be afraid of trial and error. I think that's probably a hallmark, certainly of my time with David, where he's never afraid to look out of the box. Going back to that Chris Welch, that 3D in a box back in the late 90s, early 2000s, what was amazing was, you know, Nick Price's data was actually quite inefficient relative to Ernie's. And so when you looked at the peaks and the sequence with Ernie, it was so fluid, it was so natural. Just that athletic sequence, that ground up sequence was so efficient. And then when you looked at prices, it was so hard and the things stacked a little bit too close. But there's two guys that got to #1 in the world and dominated. So I think for me as a teacher, the data doesn't necessarily say it all. To Jonathan, to your point, you have to be an artist. You have to find a way to get the best out of the student that's in front of you. And that approach, as you say, can be completely different than the other 399 players you're coaching. And they may get to that highest peak on the mountain doing it their way. And so that's really cool.
I think for the amateur players watching as well, just quickly, you know, I think it's some great points you've made there, Sean. I think it's really important to keep it simple, and for the coaches as well. You know, you might have all this data, but at the end of the day, it's a little feel, it's a little phrase, it's a little, okay, you know, rotate my ribs, or okay, resist my right side, or whatever it is, based on the facts and analysis. So it's important to keep it simple and keep it, you know, something you can play with and use, rather than, it's not a science test in a lab. At the end of the day, it's a problem-solving game in an ever-changing environment. So you need to keep it simple and something you can use.
Well, and it's a min-max, isn't it? It's not for us to teach them everything we know, but rather what they need to know. And to Chris's point, maybe, hey, a change in approach to freshen things up, freshen the feel up. That's fantastic too, because maybe that next fresh feel is even more efficient than the previous one.
Yeah. And we got to be careful too, because the data at the end of the day is dumb. It's just data, right? And the interpretation of it is where the gold is at. And I mean, we have to be critically thinking of it, and we can't sort of, because it's so easy for people who maybe have more access to the data to say, okay, this is the correct interpretation of it, but be your own thinker. So I think, you know, what you said about the price inefficiency, right? I remember seeing that and reading that and being like, you know, he's saying, oh, you know, Nick Price's graph, and I love Welch, right? But this is just me trying to be like intellectually honest with myself. It's like, you know, he's saying his swing was inefficient. I remember thinking, well, heck, I'll take his inefficiency, his bank account, and his 3 majors any day of the week. So to me, it's like, what is the lens that we're actually looking at that data? And then also understanding that, like, even the current place of technology, like all the technology we have, if we could put it all in one room, get someone strapped up, TrackMan, 3D, EMG, force plates, yada, 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 that's still a small percentage of what's actually at play. So don't think the data is sort of like covering everything. It's not. And that space that it's not covering, maybe that's the arc, maybe that's just unknown variables, whatever you want to call it, but pay tremendous respect to that, because at the end of the day, the outcomes that we're trying to achieve are being influenced by the variables that aren't being captured in that data. So you got to be like considerate of that, right? And to me, that's always something that I'm, you know, constantly not trying to be like, okay, like there's any real magic in any of this. It's just, it's something. It's better than nothing if you don't make bad interpretations, but it's not everything.
I also think as well, Chris, some great points by both you guys there. I think we all must understand, as elite teachers of elite players and tour players particularly, we're dealing with thoroughbred racehorses, right? So these guys are going to make us look good no matter what. And I've always said I'm a backroom boy. I'm just a very small part of the equation. There's always going to be great champions, whether there's coaches or not. You know, the more I analyze, you know, amazing athletes in every arena, you know, they're just pretty special people. Some of them are a little bit mentally kind of out there, a little bit to some extent compared to normal people, because you have to be extraordinary or prepared to do the extraordinary to be extraordinary. So I think, you know, it's very important that I personally definitely know my place amongst it all. You know, I'm just a very small part of it, and they are the stars of the show, no question about it. And I think they're very special people in actual fact. And that's a massive part of the equation. Their will to win, their will to not lose, their fire, their determination, their drive. It's like nothing else. And you'll meet 1 in a million people like that. And to have the privilege to have their faith put in you to drive that as well is quite an amazing position to be in, I think, as a teacher and as a person, actually. And I think the big thread amongst us all, obviously we've dealt with elite players, but you know, I think the connection you get personally with the player is amazing, and it's, you know, transcends anything to me, transcends the technical aspect or anything. You know, when you're stood next to a player like you did, Chris, at the US Open, and you have Sean at numerous tournaments, and I have at the US Open on a Saturday or whatever, the connection you have with a player in the most pressurized situation, you can calm them down because you know them so well. You know, that's a beautiful thing. And when they win an amazing thing like we've all had the privilege of, to be involved in that, and for them to call you on a Monday after a major and, you know, chill out. And I had a player with the US Open in his bed, talking me through the names and stuff. And, oh, Ben Hogan got this, and he's laying in his bed. He's absolutely hammered from the night before, you know. But what an amazing thing, isn't it, through this sport of ours? And, you know, the human connection, I think, is really overlooked. And the fact that these guys are literally thoroughbred racehorses as well. And obviously, I think we have some ability in our arena as well as some passion, etc. And they kind of go hand in hand to some extent. And you can get more out of the racehorse, really, is what we do. But I think
sorry, just before you wrap up there, Stuart, but I think one of the things that's helped me certainly to remind ourselves as coaches that we should spend time on the course with our players. So I would definitely advise, you know, especially in a one-on-one environment, if you're working with a club golfer or you're working with, I think going back to the time Lee Westwood came over to us, he had been up to 4th in the world. He came over as 261st in the world. And before David said one thing, he went out and he said, let's play 9 holes. So I think as instructors, least we forget where they're going to have, where they're going to maybe open up to you, and where they maybe can talk to their feels and that artistic aspect beyond capturing the data, is go out with your players on the course. You know, what shots do you fear? What lies? What conditions sort of give you the EBGBs, whether, as I say, club level. I remember going out for 9 holes with Lee, and we captured some footage on the course, just letting him play. David was a great listener. Lee said, hey, this is what's going on. And sure enough, 3 weeks into that sort of sabbatical that he had off the European Tour, he left here. And I remember I just saw the light bulb go off. And so before David made any incisions or suggestions, he really got to see the player on the course, get to know him and get to know his fears and anxiousness. So even the top players there, guys, we know, hey, they're only human. They get anxious. And so we've got to find ways to get them, as you say, whether it's the club level or that elite level player, what's going on the golf course. Least we forget, with all that technology at our disposal, in 5 shots we can capture everything, what have you. But getting them on the course is a valuable part of the teaching process, certainly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, guys, you touched on so many different subjects there, and I think for me, you know, one in my role within the Leadbetter organization of helping train the next up and coming coaches and help educate them, and something that David always impresses upon me is, again, around the technology, it's fantastic and it's great to have all that data, but he wants the instructors, like Sean, you touched upon it, to be instinctive. Chris, you said as well, it's kind of the data's there, but you have to kind of look at the big picture. And David's kind of said a lot to me about, hey, you know, make sure that the guys really kind of understand the vision, the big picture, they're instinctive, they go with their heart, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with a human being. Now, Sean, I've had the pleasure to watch you for numerous hours coaching. I've had the pleasure to be around David and John. I've not had the pleasure to watch you teach, but I have followed you a lot on social media and with what you're doing. And I think any time guys in your caliber, in your level of coaching, David, for me, it always stands out how you guys are just master communicators. You're so good at getting the message across in a very simple way. And I know something David always strives for simplicity, but it always strikes me that you have the ability to develop a relationship, build the trust alliance with the player, and you kind of exude that care and that empathy. And I just wondered, and for players, is have you tried to develop that, or is that just organically grown over the years, or is it something you've all worked on? And I know there'll be burning questions, and there's a couple come in already around the technology and what Bryson's working on. So Chris, we'll get to that in a second, but I'm interested from a coaching point of view. Is there, but how you interact with the individual, I think, is massive. So Sean, what would you kind of say in terms of your development around that area?
You know, one of the things that struck me years ago, I was at the Hawaii Open, and I was over there with Michelle, and she was playing with Trevor and Charles Howell. She was playing one of her men's U.S. Open appearance, or Hawaiian Open. And we're walking down, I don't know, the 8th or 9th hole, and Charles looks at me, and Jimmy Johnson was on his bag, and he says, you know, hey, Hogan, he said, if you were to pick one fault of David as a coach, what would it be? And Jimmy's looking at me going, okay, he's got to choose his words carefully. And I said, you know what, Charles? The greatest fault David has is that he cares so bloody much. And that to me, that was my instinctive answer. I said, David, to a fault, cares so much about all his students. You can't imagine how many college players, juniors, obviously he's helped. He worked with Charles since he was, what, 10 or 11. And so to me, yeah, I think that's really an instinct. I mean, as humans, I think the helpfulness that we have as doctors, nurses, first responders, that's amazing just to have that instinct. But I think looking at David, and so that rubbed off on me a lot. I could see the care that he had, the late calls that he'd have with Nick and some of his players and what have you, and the dedication to the craft to help them achieve their goals. And so there was a lot of selflessness there where he just dedicated himself to that process. So I definitely feel that caring instinct. You know, Johnny, you can elaborate on that, but it's very much, I think we're all in this business because we care a lot about our students. And you're obviously at the junior academy there, the International Junior Academy in Hilton Head. I mean, you got to look after you got probably upward of 100 students there. So there's no way you can do that job and not have that caring instinct in you.
No, you have to love it. You have to love people as well, and you know, you need what I would term a chameleonic personality. So you can deal with a Bryson. You know, I said to Chris when we did that shoot the other day, he's the perfect guy for Bryson. Sorry, I got some. He's the perfect guy for Bryson in the fact that, you know, he will, you know, he's a scientific guy. He can talk in science, and then he knows him intimately as well. So, you know, I think that you need that chameleonic personality, number one. I think you also need some care and some love of the person as well. But you know, I also think you shouldn't get too technical with people, as we said before. You know, you kind of alluded to, you know, not getting too into it. I never give more than one thing back and one thing down. You know, despite all the technology and stuff, my kind of watchword is, okay, if I can't make this as simple as the fact that I can't give one thing back and one thing down and change lots of the data. I think Mr. Cook the other day said, you know, if you press one button, the whole dashboard lights up. And that's a really good way to put it. If you understand cause and effect, you know, you'll kind of go, right, okay, if I give that thought down, that thought there, and that's how simple you need to keep it. But, you know, with regard to, you know, the care and attention, I think it's very important that you kind of, you know, got a very chameleonic personality. I apologize about my dog there. Over to you, Chris. Bloody yes.
Chris, what for you?
I mean, yeah, I mean, fundamentally,
Chris, can you hear us? Any thoughts on that? How you manage your players, just from a, you know, personality and sort of all the demands that go with giving of your time and energies?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a people business, right? And this isn't just competitive golfers. This is the recreational golfer that comes to you with their dreams, whether it be winning a club championship or sick of slicing it for 10 years. Like there's a lot of emotion that people attach to this game because they love it so much, and just having, you know, understanding that, having a lot of empathy for that. You know, oftentimes people are going to be intimidated with getting a lesson too. I mean, I spent a big part of my career teaching at a driving range just through word of mouth, just recreational golfers, and teaching tour people is different. It's rewarding in a different way, but that's also rewarding, right? And I think to know that you're just involved with other people in an endeavor that they just hold so close to them, like to their heart and emotionally, it's a really cool process. But it's something that I think we gotta you know, you gotta really be sort of serious about it in terms of how you come at a person and really kind of give them your best effort, regardless of their skill level. You know, to Jonathan's point, I think we're constantly switching gears, you know, for being chameleons, whatever you want to call it, right? And this is where I think having access to different forms of communication, whether it be technical or not technical, whatever, allows you to switch gears between different students and how they're going to process information differently, or even the same person and how they may process information differently depending on their mood or where they are in their own sort of periodization or development of their game, right? So, you may communicate to one person wildly different one day than the next day, just depending on where they are in their own personal arc of development. And I think that's where you just gotta, just really be intuitive to what's in front of you, the person that's in front of you, their personality, maybe their energy at that given moment, and really kind of, again, develop, have a pretty kind of wide range of ways to communicate, so that you can draw from the one that you feel is most appropriate given kind of where the situation is at that moment and who you're dealing with. So, again, I think good coaching is us as a coach being very flexible and being able to switch gears depending on the situation.
And just quickly, I coached Mark McCormack from IMG every month for like 3 years actually before he died, and became quite a good friend of mine and quite a good mentor actually. Sent me all these books and stuff like that. And he said what you said is the fact that he always used to say, Jonathan, we're in the relationship people business, which I think is a great point you made there, Chris.
And also having a bit of levity. I think one of the hallmarks of working with David and getting to know and spend a little bit of time with Butch over the years and speaking to him, if you notice and to your point, Chris, even if it's for a player that's trying to win the club championship, trying to keep them relaxed in that lesson environment, or just coming up with something for them when they're on the course, whether it's breathing, whistling, favorite song, and they're coming up with strategies like that. But levity in the lesson is a great sort of icebreaker. It gets them, loses that killer tension in them, and you can start to work with them. And just I think probably a hallmark of David over the years that I've applied, especially with my club golfers. I think they're coming on a lot of time. To Chris's point, they're trying to turn a 60-yard slice into a 10-yard slice. You may as well have them have fun in the process.
And I think on the tour, a little bit. Sorry, Chris. Sorry, can't say something. Just on the tour, I think that's a great point. There is the fact that there's a lot of man management involved at the end of the day, and there's a lot of stuff that goes on when you're with a player that's just like making light of the situation, taking pressure out of the situation. In practice rounds, I've had some of the best fun of my life in practice rounds with players, and I suppose you guys have as well. And that's an excellent point there, Sean. It's not all about technique and technique and technique. It's like, okay, yeah, we're in the middle of the British Open, but hey, you see that woman over there? Geez, can you believe she's done this? There's a lot of banter around, isn't there, which I really enjoy on the tour, and I think it helps the player's performance actually once you know the player.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, all that, right? Knowing when to give a player space too. It's like, I've been on the range where it's just like, okay, this person's checked out. Like, they're like, you got to give them a minute, whether it be because of frustration or whatever. And then, know when to, like, I mean, and I say no, because there's no way to like know this, right? It's just intuition that you develop. And this is where I think you just got to like teach and be around people, and you develop that over time. But sometimes probably the best thing is to like, hey, you're being a baby. You're playing golf for a living. Like, you made a double bogey on 18. Like, well, like, it's golf. Like, chill out, right? Like, so it's like sort of knowing, kind of, again, knowing, right? But like just having that instinct and also having that conviction to kind of speak honestly to a person. It's like, if you feel like it's the right thing to say, kind of do it. Like, you can second guess anything 20/20 hindsight. I mean, they'll get you nowhere, right? But it's like, in that moment, trust your sort of intuition as a coach, and just trying to be, someone who's really caring for a person and being honest with them. But sometimes that's getting in their face a little bit, and sometimes it's giving them space. But I think, again, it comes back to that, just kind of be intuitive and trust that in yourself as well. And that's something that I've had to mature into as a coach also, because you work with a tour guy, it can be hard sometimes, right? Like, especially when you're early out on tour, to kind of get in someone's face a little bit. But I think at the end of the day, if you're going to really be the best coach you can for someone, you got to come from a certain level of like honesty, emotional honesty and intellectual honesty.
And I think they appreciate that. I think, tour players are surrounded by sycophants at the end of the day. They live in a world where no one says no, right? And I think they really value honesty, like proper honesty that you're talking about and that Sean gives and we all give. I think they really value that, because that's the real world. So that's a great point you made there, I think.
Jonathan, I think absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think if you're just true to yourself and honest, people respect you for that, and I think it has longevity as well. I think you'll be more successful over a period of time, and a lot of people, like you say, try to be somebody that they're not. I think there's obviously
if you don't have success, at least you went down with a good fight, right? You went down with an honest fight. I mean, you might not be successful, but at least you went into it with like the right attitude. Because guess what? If you're not honest, you still might not have success, and then what? You really
sync with your integrity.
There's obviously a lot of amateurs watching. David Hannum has posted a question here. It says, obviously, and Chris, this is more aimed towards you to start off with, but obviously loving what Bryson is bringing to the party. Obviously, the amateurs can't wait for the Masters to come around, but what should the amateurs be thinking about of where Bryson's going with his game, and how should amateurs then think about shaping their training?
I mean, I think all amateurs should start to spend 4 to 5 days a week in the gym, eating, 3,000 plus calories and training, at least 3 times a week. And no one's going to ever get hurt by this, by the way.
Disclaimer.
I don't know, right? What?
We need a disclaimer on that one, buddy.
Disclaimer on that one. I mean, Bryson's insane, right? The guy's insane, which is part of like that's the mental makeup in general. You spoke to that earlier. He's just going at it so hard from every angle. He's 26, not married, no kids, has the life luxury to kind of allocate pretty much all of his time towards this. It's a unique scenario. And, he's also there a lot of guys, when they get sort of at that upper echelon, rightfully so, they need to be sort of protective of their game and a little bit risk adverse, right? Like if you're 50th in the world, you shouldn't be changing your swing or trying to chase an extra 30 yards. You're making millions of dollars a year. Just like stay pat and just kind of cash in for the next 10 years. That's probably appropriate for 99% of the people who get to that level. But, for whatever reason, he wants to keep chasing it. And this is where we've tried to do it in an intelligent fashion. And I've talked about this before, but there's risk involved in this. There was no guarantee that this was going to work out this way. I mean, he changed his body dramatically. He changed his swing fairly dramatically. There's been people who've done that who've lost their game, right? So there was an element of risk that he took on, and I was very adamant about it. I was communicating that to him. There's risk on this. If you're going to do this, okay, like I'll help you, and we'll try to do it as thoughtfully as possible. But there is risk. Don't think the risk isn't there. So for other people, I mean, I think that's sort of the nature of competition. Some people will decide that they want to take on that risk. Some people will probably not be successful at it. If everybody on tour try to gain X amount of pounds and X amount of miles per hour club head speed, some of those people will lose their game. That's the reality of it. So, a certain percentage of the population who try to kind of make this like uptick in their game will probably not come out of it great. Some people will, and that's the nature of things like this, right? And again, Bryson's very unique in terms of his sort of like, the type of risk he's willing to take on with it at this point of his career, and it's so far it's been good. And we're gonna again keep trying to be thoughtful of it, but there's no guarantees to any of this. So
yeah, and to your point, Chris, look, another way to answer the question would be for anybody looking to maximize their game potential, you've got to say, hey, you've got to come up with a formula that based upon the player's talent and skill level, the amount of time they have to play and practice, especially if we're talking about club golfers, is you may come up with a strategy that's built around wedge play and putting, right? Obviously, we're talking about distance here with Bryson, but as you say, some players, you may hurt them dramatically if you go after maybe a length gain, and maybe they're playing off the appropriate tees and it's their wedging and putting that's really the leak in their game. And again, if the goals are just minor, then that may be the fix for that at the club level. So I think to the question that was fielded, it's about maximizing the potential based upon that skill level and how much time available to play and practice. But as you say, in Chris's case, hey, it's it's his craft, and he's gone about it, as you say, in a very unique way in terms of taking that distance concept to an all new level, and then changing his body to, say, facilitate it. So, you know, all power to him. That, as you say, the trial and error is still there, but I think for the club level, that they've got to be careful and maybe have the, you know, the teacher really assess based upon what they're watching on the golf course and maybe some measurements and data, and then come up with a formula that might be a better fit for them. And as you say, less risk, perhaps, you know.
And like you said, just being realistic with their game plan. And I don't think that's always a function of what they tell you either, right? I mean, I remember, again, teaching on the range, and people come to you and they're like, yeah, I really want to like change my game. I'm willing to practice like 5 days a week, 2 hours every day. It's like, oh, okay, cool. Like, do you have a family? Yeah, I just had a baby, you know, 6 months ago. Just got raped at work. It's like, or just got a promotion at work. Like, I don't think these two things are gonna match up, right? Like, we got to reassess kind of like your sort of predicted time allocation towards this, and just kind of helping people come up with realistic plans that fit their life too, you know.
I think there's a massive divide between the amateur game and the pro game that we're talking about. We're talking more about the pro game than anything. You know, the amateur game, in my view, you just enjoy playing, man. There's enough stress in the world, you know. Go see your PGA pro, your local pro, improve your technique a little bit, get control of the ball, go and play beer golf. God, I'd love to play beer golf, and a lot of people would. You know, we're in a privileged position to play this great game, drive a cart round. You know, you can forget what's going on in the office, what's going on in your life for 4 hours. You know, it's a beautiful thing. So my suggestion for most players, not all, but for most, would just be enjoy the game as an amateur. Just observe what the pros and the elite players are doing, and enjoy that aspect as well. You know, it's quite remarkable what's going on in the game of golf on both aspects. But I think they're both very different worlds in my view.
Yeah. Jonathan, if I was to say that you could have one question to either Sean or Chris, what would it be?
Jeez. Okay. What's to Chris then? Here we go. What's a pivotal turning point in your coaching career, and what's a pivotal turning point in your personal life?
In my personal life, with regards to like just golf, or just
you
personal?
might move somewhere, yeah, golf or golf related. You know, I think what people don't see is the sacrifice players and coaches make. I mean, I've moved countries, I've come to America with a suitcase, Sean's done the same. You know, I think behind even coaches, there's a lot of sacrifices personally and professionally that we've made. So, you know, let's expose some of those. You know, what have you done? What are pivotal moments? If you could pick two, you know, a personal and a professional one, what would they be?
I mean, coaching wise, this is interesting. I think because I've always tried to be around like a lot of different teachers who are exceptional, and just learn from them, and kind of, you know, really think about, okay, why did they have success when they had success, and why did they not have success when they didn't? Because no one's batting 1,000. We all have kind of like our successes and failures, and kind of like filling my mind with that. And then when I started to do some of the biomechanics stuff, I learned a little bit about the body and some physics. It was like I just constantly had these like aha moments of, oh, that's why when this teacher did this, this worked, and that's why this may not have worked. And so it's like, I guess, learning the biomechanics in some ways, but only because I already had that reference of being around great teachers. So it's sort of like, you know, that window of time when those two worlds collided with each other, that I felt like I had a lot of really cool insights in terms of like how I see things working in the golf swing, I guess. And then obviously like being around Tiger and just having this incredible sort of like window to the experience of one of the best golfers of all time. And then, you know, marrying that with like studying so much of his footage and hearing his personal experience. So for example, like his swing in 2000, to me, it's one of the best of all time. It's like, you know, sort of a gold standard of sorts. And then having him talk about his experience, what he felt in his hands and his body during that time, I think was incredibly illuminating, again, in terms of how I see the way golf swings work. So that's just purely from like a teaching, like kind of swing perspective, right? That little like bucket within the greater sort of world of coaching. At a personal level.
But how many? Listen, for example, how many places have you lived? How many places have you moved to? You know, all these things, all the sacrifices we make. I mean, I've lived in 4 different countries. I've lived in 7 different cities, you know, in pursuit of this. And I'm sure you guys have got a similar story. And I don't think people see the backstory to the coach or the player. You know, the pursuit of this and what you're willing to sacrifice on a personal level is quite remarkable and quite extraordinary compared to most people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, traveled all over, you know. I'm not married, don't have kids. I've lived the last, you know, whatever it is, probably 7 years kind of out of a suitcase, just traveling around. So, you know, and I'm kind of at that point in life where I think at a personal level, I want to invest more time in, but that hasn't been it for a long time. It's just been very tunnel vision on, you know, what can I do to kind of be the best at this aspect of things. So, you know, those are some of them. I mean, it's hard. I mean, I love it too. So it's hard to call it a sacrifice because it's sort of like, I don't know if I could have done anything other than what I've done. I don't know if that would have been possible.
I was sure.
There's like two like.
No, Chris, yeah, Chris, I was going to kind of give each of you the option to ask each other a question. You're all obviously master coaches and instructors. I think it would just be, it's an interesting topic to see what you would ask each other. So, you know, Sean, if you were to ask Jonathan a question, what would it be for you?
No, Sean.
Yeah, I think for Jonathan, the thing that's always impressed me about Jonathan is he always seems to, how shall I say, he's great at identifying the student in front of him and getting the most out of them to achieve their goals. Like when I look at some of his girls, US junior winners, the guys he's coached, I mean, Gossett and Ben Ann, obviously, look, I mean, you know, I thought what the job he did with Michael Campbell to win there at Pinehurst. So my question to Jonathan would be, what do you feel has guided your instincts and sort of talents as a coach team? How do you, if you had a master class on getting the most, because I've always felt you really targeted your students, what they need to focus on, and they get the most out of it. Your students have always achieved great things within the scope of their talent level and skill set and what have you.
Well, I think there's a commonality between all 3 of us, and the commonality is we are not theorizers. We don't sit on the sidelines and theorize. We definitely listen to the theories. There's no question about it. We absorb the theories, but I think we have been in the arena and we've been in the trenches. And I don't think there is any substitute or shortcut to that. And I term that learning your craft. And you learn the craft in the trenches, whether you're teaching at a driving range like Chris was talking about. I coached at a caravan park in Skegness in the middle of nowhere for a while when I was a young guy. You know, we've all been through the mill, and we've all learned really in the trenches of all these different players, all these different personalities. You know, what we do is part entertainment, is part technical. And then as you climb up the tree like we all have, it becomes a lot more technical, but you've still got the same elements in there. And the elements are being able to deal with people, being able to get the most out of people, and being able to obviously add in and fuse in the modern stuff that we all know. So there's literally no substitute for being in the trenches, and there is literally no shortcut for being in the trenches and putting the hours in. I was just thinking, I was looking at us on this little web thing here and thinking, right, how many balls have we seen hit between us 3? How many shots have we seen between us 3 in live ball shots with obviously some incredible players? If we wrote down the players we've worked with and been with, you know, it's remarkable. But, you know, there is no substitute for that. And you learn to deal with people, you learn to deal with personalities. I mean, geez, if you can deal with Alex Checker like I did for a while, you can deal with anybody, buddy.
Jonathan, you talk about the players that you've been with, but I think what not a lot of people know about is the amount of coaches that all 3 of you have influenced as well along the way. I mean, we started today's session talking about the influence that David's had on you guys, but the influence that you guys have had on other professionals that are coaching as well has been truly phenomenal. And Sean, I know you've been around numerous guys around Champions Gate, Lake Nona, Jonathan East. Chris, you guys have influenced the world of golf coaching as well. So I think that's something that shouldn't go missed. And Chris, not to leave you out, if you had a question for either Jonathan or Sean, or one each, we'll give you two, what would it be for you if you had to ask them a question that you think you would want to?
So I got two questions, and it's for both of you. You can choose one or answer both of them. What's the most nervous you've ever been while teaching, or what's the most you've ever like second guessed yourself with like a student or situation or coaching, where you're like, ugh, am I really going down the right path or whatever it is? Because I know I've had those. So
great question.
I'll take the a player that we've both worked with there, Chris. You know, Trevor Immelman, obviously, just what a gosh.
That's Trevor, though. Let's be honest.
Yes. I mean, he really would push you hard as an instructor to get, say, you know, dial in what I guess what he would call perfection, and so it was always a challenge working with him, because as soon as he might hit one indifferent shot, maybe second shot to 18. I remember Oakland Hills, the PGA there, he's just played 17 and a half beautiful holes. He hits this skanky heel shot up 18, and we've got to go to the range now for 3 hours to fix that. But I think a leap of faith I took with him early on was, as you know, like a Charles Howell, he had a lot of down and swing direction left. So going into the early days of TrackMan, and I was sort of thinking, wow, if I can get instead of him fighting too much of an into out effort through it, if I can just get him almost shallowing it by going more left. In other words, you know, so when he went left, I put an alignment stick at the Bridgestone one year at Firestone, and it was like he went on a 5 or 6 tournament spree where he just couldn't miss it online, you know, offline. And so he even looked at Neely there. I stuck the alignment stick, a little bit of a VJ drill. And I said, hey, I stuck it 2 inches in front of his hands, just off the outside of his wrist. I said, go underneath that on the way down. And he goes, hang on, why am I looking at the ball going straight and swinging left? And I said, well, I said, when you're down on it, you better be going left, his swing direction. So instead of fighting an excessive swing direction to the right where he stayed too close, got jammed, his right side got too tilted, too much side bend. So going into the technique of it, I said, darn it, I'm just going to get him to go left. And it was sort of like watching it, and each shot successively just peeled online, and you could see the bulb went off for him. Okay, there's no use in me trying to get shallow by getting stuck and narrow with my right side. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. So it's just one of those moments where you're going, okay, I've seen the signs, now let my instinct kick in, and now you're with a player that wants it like that all the time. And so that, I always remember, that helped me a lot, just to understand the parlaying, maybe the signs, the club delivery into what a player's natural action is, and marry the two up. So that helped me.
I never used to get really nervous at tournaments coaching, actually, because I think the player feeds off you to some extent, and if you're nervous, they're going to be nervous. So I was always very confident at tournaments, used to walk around quite confident. But I will say that one time I did give a lesson to Jose Maria Olazábal, and I was very nervous because it was one of those like forced lessons. It was really weird, and he was always a bit of a hero of mine in my era. Obviously, I'm getting older, as I said. And his caddy like came over to me. I used to resist caddies asking me to help their players because there's always something desperate going on, and I was quite loyal to the players I was with because I was under contract with them. But I ended up teaching Olazábal at the Houston Open one year, and you know, he's like, well, I don't really want you to help me, and I'm like, oh, you're a bit of a legend, I don't really want to help you either, and shall I mess with your club face, shall I not? And, you know, it's like a really awkward one. So to answer your question, that's probably the most nervous I've ever been given a lesson, is him. You know, I remember thinking, geez, what am I doing here? Like, it was pinching. It didn't go well, I can assure you. So we didn't go do much after that. But just to Stuart's point, I think, you know, David Leadbetter obviously has had a massive influence on the world of golf, there's no question. But he's also had an enormous influence on the world of coaching. You know, I think that's kind of a given. And I think his biggest legacy is not the players he's created, even though he's created some of the best in the world and done some amazing things. I think it's the network and the web of coaches he's influenced, in actual fact. you know, if you look at people like us three, you know, we're influenced by him, and you know, base a lot of our background on him, as amongst other things, not just that, but you know, I think his influence on the coaching network and the web of coaches is absolutely phenomenal. And I think I said to him not long ago, I said, I think, you know, when all's said and done, and he hangs his video camera up or whatever he's using right now, you know, that will be his biggest legacy. I think is the influence he's had on all of us.
Yeah, no, Jonathan, I couldn't agree more. It's interesting. I was reading again today. There's a book that Butch Harmon wrote called The Pro, and in one of the pages, he actually writes about how almost every golf instructor owes a debt of gratitude to the fact that David made coaching acceptable, and almost to the point that, you know, we won't want to do this, but each coach should give a little percentage back to David, but we'll not tell him about that one. Guys, I can't thank you enough for giving your time up today. I mean, it's a chat that I'm sure between the three of you could go on for ages, but if you had to give a parting summary just to close things out, if you had to say what is your coaching philosophy in a nutshell for each of you, what would that be? Sean, with you?
Yeah, I think for me, look, focus, give your fullest attention to the person in front of you, be a great listener, create a plan for their success based upon that individual's goals, their ability level, the time they have available to play and practice, whether it's a tour player, a player aspiring to be #1 in the world, come up with a plan specific to them. Be able to connect, you know, with technology now, obviously it's easy to connect with them, but find a way that you can connect with them to really help them with their goals and success going forward. So really focus on that individual in front of you, and it goes back to that cliche in golf, one shot at a time, one student at a time. So
yeah. Chris, for you?
I mean, that just, I think, you know, you got people who are coming to you, have their goals, and you're sort of helping them reach that, and basically nothing's off the table. You know, use every resource that you can tap into, constantly be learning so you can expand the resources you're drawing from. You know, you're helping them design plans, but you're also trying to, you know, you're going to need to call audibles at times, so you're also being a dynamic problem solver, you know, on this path that you kind of created on the front end. So at the end of the day, it's just saying, hey, look, you know, honoring the fact that people are coming to you with their dreams, and just kind of giving it your all to help them reach that, without any dogma, without sort of like, you know, turning a blind eye to any potential resource to help that end.
Jonathan?
That's pretty simple. You know, one size does not fit all. Just be a great version of yourself, really, and base that version of yourself on facts and evidence rather than opinion. That's kind of how I operate.
Guys, you've been so forthcoming and generous with your thoughts and your experiences, and obviously how you've got to where you are within the world of coaching as well. Obviously, Masters is coming up. If I had to probe you for a winner, just one name, who would it be? Sean?
Don't put me on the spot.
Yeah, on the spot.
Patrick Reed?
Jonathan?
Well, geez, man, I never ever predict normally because I'm always wrong, but let's just say it's going to be interesting.
There you go. Horses for courses.
Chris?
I think that lesson Sean gave Trevor is going to finally kick in, so I'm going to take Trevor.
He did the commentary.
I think he's commentating.
Yeah.
I think I'm here.
Nice.
Guys, fantastic. Thank you very much for your time. For all the viewers, don't miss out. We've got our final session tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern, and that's David himself with Pete Cowan. So that'll be a fantastic session. Another master instructor and somebody that's been incredibly successful for a long period of time. I can't wait to hear what the two of them have got to say. On behalf of Golf Zone Leadbetter, Jonathan, Chris, Sean, once again, thank you very much for your time. To all the viewers, thank you. I hope you stay safe and you tune in tomorrow for our final summit session. Thank you, guys.
Yes.
Thank you, gents. Appreciate you.